Moscow did not fall to an army. It fell to silence, panic, and blinking red letters on airport screens saying canceled. On a single night, the capital of a nuclear superpower turned into a waiting room with no exits. Families slept on freezing floors. Children cried under warning sirens. And the illusion that Moscow was untouchable shattered in front of millions. This wasn't a battlefield failure. It was something far more dangerous. For decades, the Russian state offered its people a deal. Stay obedient, and you will be safe. That deal died the moment drones crossed hundreds of kilometers and the state stood helpless. When a government can't protect its skies, its infrastructure, or its civilians, it loses more than control. It loses legitimacy. If you want to understand why this moment changes everything, stay with me. Because what collapsed that night was not air defense. It was the foundation of power itself. What you are seeing is not an isolated incident, and it is not about drones alone. It is about how modern states collapse when systems fail faster than narratives can be rewritten. For years, Moscow invested billions into the image of absolute control. Layered air defenses, strategic depth, a capital presented as untouchable. That image was not designed for war, it was designed for obedience. Because power does not rely only on force. It relies on predictability, on the belief that the state is always one step ahead. But modern warfare has changed the equation. Cheap technology now moves faster than centralized command structures. Defense systems built for missiles are overwhelmed by swarms. And when protection fails publicly, fear spreads privately. This is why airports matter. Factories matter. Fuel depots matter. They are not just infrastructure. They are psychological anchors of stability. When those anchors break, panic replaces trust. And trust, once lost, does not regenerate easily. To understand why this matters far beyond a single night, we need to step back into the deeper structure that made this failure inevitable. To understand why this breakdown was inevitable, we have to look backward, not at tactics, but at history and economic cycles. For decades, Russia rebuilt its power around a single assumption: that centralized control and raw resources could substitute for adaptability. Energy exports financed stability, security services enforced compliance, and military strength was displayed, not tested. This model worked in a slower world. In the post-Cold War era, oil revenues papered over structural weaknesses. Industrial modernization was selective. Innovation was imported, not cultivated. And resilience was replaced by the appearance of strength. But systems like this age badly. They depend on long supply chains, rigid hierarchies, and uninterrupted flows of fuel, technology, and legitimacy. Once any link is disrupted, pressure doesn't dissipate, it compounds. Modern conflict accelerates that decay. It compresses time. It exposes inefficiencies instantly. And it punishes states that confuse deterrence with durability. The air defenses around Moscow were not designed for a world where distance no longer protects you. They were built to preserve a myth, not to survive reality. And when reality arrives faster than institutions can adapt, collapse doesn't begin at the borders. It begins at the center. And that brings us to the first visible rupture. The first rupture did not come gradually. It arrived all at once. On the night of December 25th, the system was tested and it failed in real time. Not quietly, not ambiguously, but publicly, across multiple regions, under the eyes of millions. This was not a symbolic strike. It was a coordinated stress test of the Russian state itself. Airports shut down simultaneously. Flights vanished from departure boards. Industrial facilities burned uncontrollably. And the military, for the first time, had no convincing explanation. What made this moment explosive was not the damage alone. It was the visibility. Every drone that slipped through, even when intercepted, produced debris, panic, and paralysis. The capital's connection to the outside world was severed in hours. A system designed to project omnipotence revealed helplessness instead. This is how modern crises escalate. They don't destroy everything, they expose everything. Once people see that the state cannot manage chaos, they stop assuming it can manage anything else. Confidence collapses faster than infrastructure. And when that happens, the question is no longer whether the system is vulnerable. It's how many more strikes it can absorb before the damage becomes irreversible. That question leads us directly to what lies beneath the surface, the mechanisms quietly holding this structure together. Beneath the explosions and canceled flights lies a far more dangerous reality, the hidden machinery of dependency. Modern states do not collapse because of a single attack. They collapse when tightly coupled systems begin failing simultaneously. Russia's military power depends on industrial nodes that were never designed to be resilient. Chemical plants producing synthetic rubber, refineries feeding fuel into every artery of logistics, factories manufacturing components that cannot be easily replaced. These facilities are not interchangeable. They are bottlenecks. When one shuts down, production does not slow, it stops. And when several are hit at once, the effects cascade across sectors that appear unrelated on the surface. What looks like a drone strike on a factory is in reality a strike on missiles, vehicles, exports, inflation, and political stability all at the same time. This is the flaw of centralized systems built for control rather than flexibility. They are efficient in peace. They are brittle under pressure. And once attackers understand where those pressure points lie, defense becomes a game of impossible trade-offs. Protect everything, and you protect nothing. The Russian system is now trapped inside this logic. Every response exposes another weakness. Every repair increases dependence. And that brings us to the second surge, the moment when strain turns into acceleration. The second surge was not louder, it was sharper. By this point, the objective had shifted from disruption to paralysis. Energy infrastructure, fuel production, logistics hubs, all struck with methodical precision. This was no longer about spectacle. It was about timing. Refineries burning meant fuel shortages days later. Ports shutting down meant exports frozen weeks later. Supply lines stretched tighter with no slack left to absorb shocks. Modern warfare is not won by destroying armies. It is won by exhausting systems. Every tank without fuel becomes scrap metal. Every missile without propellant becomes theory. Every convoy delayed compounds pressure across the entire front. What makes this phase lethal is speed. Economic effects move faster than political responses. Markets react before speeches are written. Inflation hits households long before officials admit reality. At this stage, defense no longer restores balance. It merely redistributes failure. Protect the capital, and the front starves. Protect the front, and the capital burns. This is how acceleration works. Not collapse in a single moment, but momentum that can no longer be reversed. And when momentum takes over, the real battlefield shifts away from maps and targets. It moves into daily life. Now, the consequences land where power is most fragile in the lives of ordinary people. If you are a citizen trying to live normally, none of this feels strategic. It feels personal. You wait in line for fuel and watch prices climb. You hear explosions at night and check windows instead of headlines. You sleep in an airport terminal, realizing the state cannot even move you from one place to another. This is where systems truly break, because fear experienced privately is far more dangerous than anger expressed publicly. It settles into routines. It reshapes conversations at kitchen tables. It erodes loyalty without a single slogan being shouted for decades. Stability was the unspoken currency exchanged for silence. That currency is now worthless. When safety disappears, obedience no longer feels rational. Trust turns into quiet resentment, and resentment, once internalized by millions, becomes impossible to manage. This is the point where governments usually tighten control. But repression cannot restore safety. It can only confirm its absence. If you're watching this and thinking this could never happen to you, pause. Because systemic failure does not announce itself. It arrives disguised as inconvenience until it becomes your new normal. And when that happens at scale, the impact no longer stops at borders. Once instability takes root at home, it never stays there. It radiates outward. Energy disruptions ripple through global markets. Ports labeled as high-risk trigger insurance withdrawals. Airspace restrictions rewrite trade routes overnight. What begins as a domestic security failure quickly becomes a geopolitical liability. Investors do not wait for clarity. They price in risk instantly. Logistics firms reroute, buyers look elsewhere, and allies begin to recalculate. A country that cannot guarantee the safety of its own infrastructure cannot credibly promise reliability to the world. Energy superpower narratives collapse the moment deliveries become uncertain. Military credibility erodes when exported systems fail under observation. This is how influence decays quietly, mechanically, without formal declarations. At the same time, dependence deepens. When technology cannot be repaired domestically, supply chains tilt outward. When capital flees, leverage shifts to whoever remains willing to engage. What looks like partnership becomes submission. What looks like pragmatism becomes constraint. Geopolitics does not punish mistakes emotionally. It punishes them structurally. And once a state slips into that position, recovery is no longer a question of strength, but of time, which leads to the final uncertainty. What happens next? From here, the future narrows into three possible paths, not chosen freely, but shaped by structural constraints. The first is the managed decline scenario. The state absorbs damage, tightens control, and trades long-term sovereignty for short-term survival. Dependency deepens. Economic flexibility disappears. Stability is maintained, but only by shrinking expectations and rising repression. The system survives smaller, poorer, and permanently constrained. The second path is prolonged stagnation. No decisive collapse. No recovery. Infrastructure degrades faster than it can be repaired. Human capital drains away. Inflation lingers. The war continues, but without momentum. This is not dramatic failure. It is slow exhaustion. A system stuck, unable to move forward or step back. The third path is the most dangerous. Systemic rupture. Pressure accumulates silently until a trigger economic shock, elite fracture, or strategic defeat breaks internal cohesion. When legitimacy, resources, and fear erode simultaneously, control can unravel faster than anyone expects. History shows that systems often appear stable right up until they aren't. Which path unfolds depends less on external strikes than on internal adaptability. And adaptability is the one resource centralized systems struggle to generate under stress. This is why the present moment matters so much. Because the future is no longer being planned. It is being forced. And that brings us to the final insight, the meaning of this collapse, beyond Russia itself. What ultimately collapsed was not air defense, industry, or logistics. It was the promise that power could guarantee safety through control alone. For years, the system projected strength outward while hollowing itself from within. Efficiency replaced resilience, narrative replaced adaptation, and fear replaced trust. When pressure arrived, everything depended on systems that could not bend. This is the lesson that extends far beyond one country or one war. In the modern world, security no longer comes from size, secrecy, or intimidation. It comes from flexibility, redundancy, and legitimacy. States that confuse dominance with durability will always fail, the same way, suddenly, publicly, and irreversibly. What we are witnessing is not chaos. It is exposure. Exposure of brittle systems, exposure of outdated doctrines, exposure of a model of power that no longer fits the reality it tries to command. If this analysis helped you see the structure behind the headlines, stay with us. Subscribe, share, and continue this conversation, because understanding how systems break is the first step toward understanding how to survive them. The next chapter of this story is already unfolding.